She's 3 feet tall and furious, and the Galactic Empire says she's my new boss. The boots of seasoned soldiers echoed in rhythm across the metal corridors of the Crimson Fist, each clang of heel on blending into the endless mechanical hum of the Empire's most fearsome dreadnought. Fluorescent lights flickered intermittently above like storm pulses through the hull, and the smell of ozone, fuel, and recycled air clung to every breath. Adjusted the strap of his plasma rifle as he turned a corner toward Command Deck 4, his sharp eyes scanning the hall with a veteran's instinct, even though he knew it was safe. It was always safe up here, far above the front lines, where promotions were handed out for paperwork and sycophancy. He hated being summoned to this part of the ship, where too many decorations and not enough grit floated in polished boots and pressed uniforms. But orders were orders, and the comms message had been clear. Report to the command deck immediately. New leadership transition. That last phrase had raised every red flag in his mind. He had seen leadership transitions before, usually when someone had gotten fragged or court-martialed. Or worse, replaced by some silver-tongued rookie from the core worlds, eager to play war with real soldiers' lives. He couldn't hide the scowl tugging at his face as he entered the lift, watching the steel doors close like a coffin. 30 years in the field, scars crisscrossing his arms and ribs like medals the Empire didn't give, and now they were replacing his again. Typical. He rubbed his temples, unshaven jaw clenched tight. He had served under commanders worth dying for, and too many worth ignoring. The doors slid open with a hiss. The deck was unusually quiet, though a small assembly of officers stood to one side of the room, clearly gathered for some announcement. At the far end, beneath the looming Imperial banners, and behind the semicircular strategy table that projected a rotating image of their current operational, stood Admiral, a man so surgically boring sometimes forgot he existed. He barely acknowledged his approach before clearing his throat and motioning toward the figure standing next to him. The room was dimly lit, so at first, his eyes skimmed right past her. Then she moved, or rather stormed. Her voice cut through the tension with military precision, crisp and impossibly fierce for its volume. "Sergeant Hale, you are late. I expect punctuality from my officers. Don't make me repeat that." The command hung in the air like a thrown blade. The voice came from just 3 feet above the floor. Blinked, then he looked down. There, standing no higher than his hip, was a tiny emerald-green woman with flowing silver hair that shimmered like static in the dim light. Her violet eyes locked onto his like twin daggers, posture rigid, arms behind her back in classic command stance. She wore the black and crimson uniform of a high-ranking field officer, and the silver bar on her chest plate marked her as a commander. A real one, official, recognized by the Empire. He didn't speak, couldn't really, not at first. His brain was scrambling to match the visuals with the implications. This tiny alien girl with skin like a polished gemstone was not only standing in front of the tactical table like she owned it, she did own it. The Admiral nodded solemnly, gesturing toward her like he was presenting a finely wrapped grenade. "Commander of the Guard, your new unit overseer, effective immediately. She'll be assuming full tactical command of the recon teams for deployment." It was a joke. It had to be. Some kind of political stunt or a temporary assignment that would go away after a week of red tape and bureaucratic failure. Except she didn't look temporary, and she didn't look like she tolerated jokes. Those violet eyes were staring up at him, daring him to say what he was thinking. Her arms were still clasped behind her back, stance military perfect, posture upright as if she were 7 feet tall, and her tone left no room for dispute. "Report, soldier," she snapped again, the edge of impatience curling at her voice. He instinctively straightened, habit overpowering hesitation. "Sergeant Hale, Recon Unit Leader, 3 tour through outposts, 2 through the rim purges. Trained in zero-G infiltration, long-range plasma accuracy, and deep sabotage. Reporting as ordered, Commander." The pause before the last word wasn't lost on her. Her eyebrow twitched slightly. A beat of silence passed between them like a countdown. "Your record is impressive," she said coolly, but her tone held no admiration, just assessment. "You will be assigned to Squad Aegis. You'll continue to lead field deployments, but you'll do so under my strategy and direction. Any deviation without permission will result in suspension. Are we clear?" Wanted to laugh. He wanted to argue, to push back and test her limits like he did with every new co. But there was something about her, not just the height contrast or the alien skin or even the bizarre, almost absurd image of her glaring up at him like an angry goddess in miniature. It was the authority in her tone, the control, like she'd already outmaneuvered him before he even opened his mouth. So he nodded. "Crystal." She turned away without another word, already tapping her wrist comm to summon tactical overlays onto the table. Stood in silence for a moment, the buzzing noise of command staff to background static as he processed what just happened. He wasn't sure if he was insulted, bemused, or impressed, possibly all three, but if the Empire said she was his superior, then so be it. He'd follow orders, for now. Still, he'd be damned if he didn't find out who the hell she really was. That afternoon, he ran drills with the squad. They were tense, confused, and whispered behind their helmets like cadets at academy orientation. The rumors were already flying: a 3-foot-tall alien, an outsider promoted to commander, someone must lost a bet in high command. Didn't stop them. Let the whispers circulate. Let the new recruits laugh. That kind of noise sorted real soldiers from the weaklings faster than any formal. The next day, joined the training field in full gear, flanked by 2 droids that matched her step for step. Her voice barked orders across the drill yard with enough command presence to freeze grown men in mid-sprint. She called out patterns, corrected posture, restructured squad formations, and by the end of the session, even had to admit she knew her tactics. The squad was moving smoother than it had in months, adapting to her micro-adjustments as if they'd trained with her for years. Still, something didn't sit right. Had been through more battles than most of these kids had birthdays. He could feel when someone was hiding something, and was hiding something. Not weakness, no, she was sharper than most officers twice her size. But there was a weight behind her eyes, a secret she didn't share, a reason for that perpetual fury just beneath her surface. It wasn't ego. It was pain or loss, something buried deep. Later that evening, he saw her in the observation deck alone, staring at the planet below. Storm-racked and hostile, hung like a bloodied marble in the void. Lightning rippled across its surface in slow pulses. He approached cautiously, unsure why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe a spark of respect he hadn't expected to feel. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "You think I'm unqualified?" It wasn't a question. He stayed silent for a beat too long, then sighed. "I think you're different, and out here, different tends to die faster." She turned just slightly, and for a moment her eyes weren't filled with fire but with memory. "Let me be clear, Sergeant Hale. I've survived wars your empire didn't even bother reporting. I've outlived 10 brothers. I've buried entire squads twice my size. And I'm not here to make friends, win hearts, or prove myself to soldiers who think size means strength." He held her gaze. "Good, because I don't care about size, I care about staying alive, and you're my best shot so far." That surprised her, just a flicker, a soft breath, almost a smile. "Then shut up and listen," she said, finally turning back toward the planet. "We deploy in 48 hours, and if you fall behind, I won't save you." He chuckled. "That's fair, but you're gonna need to keep up with me, boss." She looked at him again, really looked this time, and there it was. Not just fire, but steel. Something in that moment shifted between them. Not respect, not yet, but the beginning of it. And in that flicker of silence between the lightning flashes and the hum of the dreadnought's engines, realized this wasn't going to be like any campaign he'd ever fought. This was going to be war, and he was going to love every second of it. The storm wall over-twisted like a living thing, dense clouds flashing with electrical arcs that danced across the atmosphere in spirals of fury. From the drop bay of the Crimson Fist, the planet looked like it was constantly boiling. Stood in full armor, fingers flexing near his plasma rifle's trigger grip, helmet clipped to his side, as the countdown blinked across the transport screen beside him. 45 seconds until descent. Across from him sat, legs crossed atop a small equipment crate like it was a throne in hand, silver hair tied back tightly behind her head. Her armor was compact, clearly customized for her frame, sleek with adaptive plating and microfield shielding woven into the material, no doubt top of the line, probably experimental. She didn't speak, didn't look up. The glow of tactical schematics lit her face, and for once didn't have a comment. She hadn't spoken much since the briefing, only issued commands with military efficiency. The squad was locked in. The target, abandoned fortress grid K-17 on the southern continent, supposedly derelict, probably not. The last 24 hours had been quiet but thick with tension. Squad had run through the plan 6 times and had refined every detail, right down to predicted wind shifts during descent. It should have annoyed him, but it didn't. She wasn't micromanaging. She was preparing. She knew how to think ahead, and that was rare. Still, the way she carried herself made him wonder what hell she'd been through to learn that kind of precision. Soldiers don't get that sharp without bleeding for it. 10 seconds. Strapped on his helmet, his HUD flickering online with field data, squad vitals, and live tactical feed synced at the top. The ramp doors creaked. A rush of pressure equalization. Then the hiss of hydraulic release as the exterior shell peeled back and revealed the chaos below. Wind slammed into the troop bay like a freight train, and the planet's storms greeted them with violent howls. Stood up as if gravity wasn't trying to rip her from the deck, held the overhead bar and nodded once. Go. They dropped like steel rain. 5 pods, each hurtling through turbulence that rattled teeth and strained stabilizers. Felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the kind that always hit right before impact. He grinned behind his visor, watching the fortress grow closer on his HUD. The target zone came into focus. Ancient stone reinforced with metal panels, partially collapsed walls, but still a defensible position. That meant someone had likely claimed it already. The Empire's map said abandoned. He didn't trust it, neither did. Their pod slammed into the earth, kicking up debris, and the hatch blew outward in sequence. Led the breach, rifle raised, sweeping the courtyard with trained precision. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. The squad formed up fast, already issuing commands over comms. Tight diamond formation, droids on perimeter scan, eyes on thermals, with me. No hesitation. She moved like she owned the entire world beneath her boots, her small figure surprisingly fast across uneven ground. Followed, covering her flank, eyes tracking every window and shadow. Inside, the fortress corridors groaned with the sound of age. Cracked stone, scorched metal. But the air felt wrong, warmer than it should be. He gestured toward the walls. This place was lit up recently. See the scorch pattern. Plasma scorings too fresh for century-old battles. She tapped her visor. Confirmed, residual energy traces, we're not alone. Just then a sharp beep sounded in both their earpieces. One of the perimeter droids had gone dark. A second later, a second drone's feed fuzzed into static. His grip tightened. Ambush. Didn't answer. She raised one hand and signaled the squad to halt. She moved like a whisper down the hall toward a sealed bulkhead. She didn't ask for to cover her, just expected it. And he did, stepping into position as she interfaced with the panel, fingers flying across the keypad. The door hissed, then jolted. Something had the lock. Suddenly, without warning, the wall behind them exploded inwards with kinetic force, sending dust and shrapnel through the corridor like shivs. Was already moving, diving to cover her as figures emerged through the smoke, lean shapes, low armor, high-speed rifles. Mercs, not rebels, pirates maybe, scavengers, didn't matter. They were shooting. The firefight exploded in a blur. Returned fire with disciplined bursts, dropping one, then two, keeping his shots tight to avoid stray ricochets. Didn't run. She moved forward. Her smaller form made her harder to hit, and her return fire was surgical, 2 taps, down target. He watched in disbelief as she vaulted a downed crate, tossed an EMP puck at the feet of 2 advancing enemies, and blew their armor circuits with a short, controlled blast. Then she vanished into the smoke, flanking them. It wasn't just her size or speed. She was trained in urban suppression. He'd seen elite operatives pull that kind of movement, but never with this kind of confidence from someone so small. He caught glimpses of her violet eyes glowing in the chaos like a predator, and for the first time in a long time, he was impressed during a gunfight. When it ended, the squad moved through the ruins, cleaning up the last resistors. Blood pooled in the corners, bodies sprawled across collapsed flooring. Leaned against a pillar, breathing hard, visor cracked. Walked up beside him, wiping a trickle of blood from her brow, someone else's probably. "Next time, don't hesitate when I tell you to breach the hall," she muttered, but there was no heat in her voice. He laughed. "And here I thought I was the reckless one." Later, they secured the fortress and uploaded data to the Crimson Fist. The pirates had been running black market scans, intercepting Empire transmissions, and likely preparing a larger assault on the nearby shipyard. His instinct to check this site had been spot on. Still, something wasn't adding up. Why now? Why this place? They set up camp in the main hall. Portable shields hummed low around them. The squad rotated watch. Sat cleaning his rifle while pored over decrypted data files. "You're not just guessing with these missions," he said, voice low but direct. "You knew there'd be trouble here." She didn't look up. "I analyze patterns. Pirate raids near resource lines, communication blackouts near defensive beacons, smuggling logs in planetary customs records. I see gaps. I go to where the gaps lead." He tilted his head. "That's a hell of a brain you've got, Commander." "I also read all your old reports," she added. "You follow instinct. I follow data. Between the two of us, we might survive this war." He leaned forward slightly. "You always this calculated." That got her attention. She looked up, eyes searching his for something. "I have to be," she said quietly. "Because when you're 3 feet tall and not human, no one gives you the benefit of doubt. One misstep, one wrong order, and someone dies. So I don't make mistakes." Stared at her for a long beat. "No one gets through life without mistakes. You just hide yours better." The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was honest. For the first time, the constant command tone in her voice faded. Her posture eased slightly. He watched the flicker of uncertainty cross her expression just for a second. Then she straightened again. "Don't fall asleep on watch. We're not done here." But she didn't walk away. Instead, she sat beside him on the broken stone step, data pad still in hand but no longer active. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The storm outside raged on, but for the first time since he met her, felt something shift. Not just respect, something warmer, something that felt like trust, or the start of it. The next morning, the team finished sweep recon and returned to the skies above were thick with electromagnetic interference, delaying for nearly 2 hours. During that time, and worked side by side analyzing intercepted comm logs, trying to trace who the pirates had been working for. That's when they found it, an encrypted signature attached to the outgoing data feed. It wasn't local. It wasn't even pirate tech. It was Imperial. Stared at the signature in disbelief. "That's an officer-level clearance code." His tone dropped several degrees colder. "Someone on the Crimson Fist is feeding intel to mercenaries." The implications hit hard: treason, sabotage, and it explained too much. Failed raids, ambushes, delays. Stood slowly, looking at the storm-clouded sky outside. "You're not going to report this through channels, are you?" She shook her head. "No, if the leak, coming from someone high up, I don't trust anyone but you to help me find the source." He turned to her, eyebrows raised. "So I'm the only person you trust now?" "You're the only one who questions me to my face," she said with a small smirk. "That makes you reliable." It wasn't a compliment, not exactly. But coming from her, it was as close to one as he'd probably ever get. The trust was real now, no longer forced by command structure or orders. She chose him, and in that moment something inside settled. He hadn't been sure about her, but now he was. As they lifted through the turbulent sky, sat beside her in the rear seat, both of them silent as the world fell away beneath them. The fortress shrank, storms flashing below, and the horizon stretched into an endless steel-gray void. The mission wasn't over. The war wasn't over. But they were no longer just commander and soldier. They were partners. And that was going to change everything. Back aboard the Crimson Fist, the air was thicker than it had any right to be. Not because of pressure systems or recycled oxygen, but because of the quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't belong on a warship this size. Had felt it the moment he stepped off the shuttle, how the corridors were just a little too empty, how crewmen avoided eye contact more than usual, how even the mechanical hum of the engine seemed lower, more subdued. Something had changed in the air, and it wasn't just the tension from their latest mission. Word had gotten around. He didn't need to hear it from anyone directly. He could see it in the way the command officers stiffened when walked by, how they fell silent in her presence, too respectful, too watchful, as if waiting to see her fail, or waiting to make it happen. She didn't acknowledge it. She moved through the halls like she had before, steps sharp, posture rigid, always one step ahead of everyone else, but saw it now more clearly than he had before. The way her hand lingered near her sidearm just a second longer. The way her eyes flicked to surveillance nodes in corners, the way she slept lighter. She knew something was coming. And now that they had proof of a leak, every move she made was a calculation. She had no illusions that anyone would protect her. Except maybe him. And that knowledge settled like a weight between them, unspoken but constant. They had isolated the encrypted clearance signature from the pirate data logs, traced it through several rerouted pings, and narrowed the source to the high command deck. That alone wouldn't be enough for a formal accusation. It could have been spoofed. But the message headers had one anomaly, something easy to miss unless you were looking for it. A call timestamp synced with a specific console ID. A console belonging to Admiral's adjutant, a weasel-faced officer named Tao. Didn't know much about him, only that he never blinked enough and always seemed to be watching everything without saying anything. That type. The quiet kind that never got blood on their hands but always had access to things they shouldn't. It was a thin thread, but clung to it like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She didn't tell anyone else. She didn't report it to command security. Instead, she called a meeting at one of the auxiliary briefing rooms, the kind that didn't record logs or transmit to the bridge. Only two other squad leaders were present, both loyalists who'd served under her before. They didn't ask why it was secret. They just listened as she outlined the plan. She wanted a silent trace. Follow, map his access, duplicate his console output, but do it quietly. No alerts. No digital footprints. Volunteered without hesitation. That night he watched from the engineering wing service conduit, a narrow between maintenance panels that offered just enough room for surveillance microdrones to slip through. He watched as the adjutant checked his twice, then moved toward the restricted comms terminal, one he had no business near. The panel blinked once, then dimmed. Sensor confirmed a data burst was transmitted. He logged the signal path and pulled back, making sure not to trigger motion detection. Back in his bunk, he reviewed the logs 3 times. It wasn't just command-level encryption, it was ghost-coded. Designed to delete itself from the system after activation. That meant wasn't freelancing. He had help, higher up, possibly himself. When he handed the 2, she didn't say anything for a long moment. Just stared at it, jaw tight, expression unreadable. Then, with a slow exhale, she slid it into her command satchel and locked it. We wait. We need confirmation of the recipient. Until then, we're shadows. Nodded, but something in him twisted. Waiting meant exposure. Waiting meant could vanish, cover his tracks, or worse, accelerate whatever plan he was part of. But he trusted her judgment. He had to. Still, it didn't sit right. The next day brought new complications. A recon ship on patrol outside the outer ring sent a distress ping, short, garbled, then silent. Long-range sensors confirmed debris and radiation fallout in the area, but the signal trace suggested the ship wasn't destroyed by a collision. It was intentional, deliberate. Requested deployment clearance to investigate. The request was. The denial came from his office. Was in the room when she received the message. She didn't react immediately, just read it once, then twice, fingers tapping the edge of her desk. He spoke first. "That's not standard protocol. Recon teams don't just explode without follow-up." "I know," she said simply, voice cold. "Then request override through Outer Fleet Command." "They'll ignore it, we'll bury it." Stepped closer. "Then we do it ourselves." She looked up, and for the first time he saw hesitation flicker behind her eyes. Not fear, didn't fear anything, but weariness, frustration. The weight of pushing against an immovable wall day after day and still being expected to smile. But then she blinked and it was gone. "Prep a ghost ship. No beacon, no flight log, you're flying it." That night they launched under blackout protocols. A retrofitted personnel transport stripped of transponders with a single jump coil. Piloted, handled navigation. It wasn't the first time they'd flown alone together, but this felt different. He could feel it in the silence between them. Not strained, but heavy. Charged. Somewhere in the last few days, something had changed between them. Not dramatic, not spoken, but present in the way she handed him the flight route without a word, and the way his fingers brushed hers when he accepted it. Neither of them pulled away. The wreckage drifted in orbit like bones in a graveyard. The recon vessel was torn in half, systems fried, hull breached in multiple places. Rand scans while suited up, docking the ship to the airlock remains. He entered first, weapon drawn. No life signs, just scorch marks and melted consoles. Sabotage confirmed. He retrieved the nav logs and security footage core, then floated back to the ship. Decrypted the logs silently, then her fingers stopped. "There," she whispered. On the grainy feed they saw a figure, short, lean, place a device under the console, tap a few commands and leave. It was someone else, another officer, one of his inner circle. Stared at the screen like it was a death sentence. "He's not working alone." Leaned on the console, arms crossed. "So now what?" She looked up at him. "Now we burn the entire damn operation." When they returned to the Crimson Fist, it was well past shift cycle. The halls were dimmed for rest hours, but the surveillance nodes never slept. Walked faster, no longer subtle. The containing the footage was locked in her grip. She was heading straight for his office. Caught up to her, placed a hand on her arm. "You do this now, in front of the command board, and you won't walk out of that room. He has to answer for this. He won't, he'll discredit you, say it's fabricated, leak your background, call you unstable. He's been waiting for you to make this move." She paused, just long enough for to see the conflict rise again. She wanted to fight, she always did, but she wasn't stupid. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Let me handle, quietly. Give me 24 hours. She hesitated again, then handed him the pad. "Be careful, if they know you're onto them." "They already do," he muttered and turned down the hall. It was a long night. He spent most of it slipping between maintenance corridors, accessing logs, watching old footage, listening in on encrypted channels. The deeper he dug, the more tangled it became. Wasn't just smuggling data. He was rerouting missions, diverting supply runs, delaying reinforcements. Sabotage disguised as inefficiency. When he finally confronted him, it wasn't in a dramatic hallway ambush or firefight. It was in the mess hall during first shift. Sat down across from him like it was a friendly chat. Froze mid-bite. Leaned in. "You've been busy." His eyes narrowed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You will. You've got until sundown to disappear. Because after that, your name goes straight to Fleet Command with evidence." His hands didn't shake. He was calmer than expected, too calm. "You won't live to send it," said softly. That was all needed. He stood, walked away, and triggered the backup plan. 3 hours later, the Crimson Fist's AI flagged an unauthorized transmission coming from his quarters. Before the security team could even react, had already sealed the room, purged the terminal, and uploaded the entire contents to his personal archive. By the time summoned her, it was too late. She entered the command chamber with beside her, In hand, expression neutral. Stood behind the projection table, flanked by officers who didn't meet her eyes. "Commander, you've overstepped." "No," she said, voice clear and sharp. "I've exposed a traitor in your ranks, and I have the logs to prove it." Stepped forward and tossed the on the table. It flickered to life. Silence fell. Then chaos. The command chamber had always been cold, but now it felt frozen in time, suffocating beneath layers of tension so thick the air itself seemed brittle. The HAD tossed onto the table still hummed, its screen cycling through the damning images and logs that exposed the extent of Tal's sabotage. Tactical reroutes, ghost signal patterns, encrypted transmissions, and then the clincher, a clear recording of face as he manipulated the console with deliberate calm, crossed with timestamps and biometric confirmation from the Crimson Fist's own internal logs. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The facts were laid bare, and yet Admiral hadn't moved. He hadn't even spoken. He stood behind the long command table, his arms folded tightly across his chest, flanked by two officers who refused to look at, their eyes glued to the floor as though if they avoided acknowledgement long enough, the truth might simply dissolve. Didn't blink. She stood with her back straight, her violet eyes hard and unreadable as they locked onto's. Could feel it in the air, the razor-thin balance between explosive confrontation and forced decorum. He'd been on enough battlefields to know when the real bullets were verbal and political, and this moment had all the makings of a quiet war. Had come here prepared, armed not with plasma fire but with irrefutable data and strategic timing, and yet didn't flinch. Finally, the Admiral's eyes flicked down at the display, then slowly back to. His expression didn't change. "And what exactly do you expect me to do with this, Commander?" Stepped forward before she could speak, voice hard. "Your adjutant has been leaking Empire movements to enemy factions and orchestrating field sabotage that's cost lives. You don't get to ask what to do with that. You act." Gaze slid to, lips barely moving. "Watch your tone, Sergeant." "I'd rather not watch more soldiers die because your inner circle is rotten," said, refusing to back down. But raised her hand, stopping him cold. She took a step forward, each boot tap echoing loud in the silent room. "You already knew," she said, voice low but cutting. "You knew was dirty, maybe not at first, but you figured it out, and you didn't stop him, because whatever he was doing served your interests." The temperature in the room plummeted. Shoulders remained squared, but his fingers twitched slightly at the edge of the table. "You're accusing a superior officer of treason, Commander. That's a dangerous move, especially with no chain of command authority to back it." Didn't blink. "I've already sent copies of these logs to Sector Command and to the Warden Archives on Zeta Prime. If anything happens to me, or Sergeant Hale, the entire packet auto-publishes to the Military Tribunal Network. So don't threaten me, Admiral. You're boxed in. There's no scenario where this doesn't end with an investigation." There was a pause, just a few seconds, but long enough to shift the gravity of the room. Exhaled slowly through his nose, then gestured to the silent officers at his sides. "Leave us." They hesitated, then obeyed. The door slid shut behind them, leaving only the three of them and inside the chamber. Moved away from the table, walking slowly toward the far end of the room where it shimmered through reinforced glass. His voice, when he spoke again, was quiet and oddly philosophical. "Do you know what this ship was designed for, Commander? It wasn't made to fight pirates or skirmishers. The Crimson Fist was built during the Dreadnought Renaissance, meant to hold orbit over resistance planets and inspire fear by presence alone. It's a symbol, not a weapon." Scowled. "So you let it rot from the inside out to protect the symbol." Ignored him. He turned his head slightly toward. "You're ambitious, that's clear. Smart, too. Smarter than most of the little warlords the Empire throws stripes at, but you've made enemies. You walk into rooms like you own them. You give orders like everyone's beneath you. That breeds resentment. You think you've survived because of your skill, and maybe you have, but don't mistake survival for support. People tolerate you, Commander. They don't trust you." didn't react. And I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to stop traitors from gutting our military. Finally turned to face her fully. This isn't over. No, she agreed. It's just beginning. Then she turned and left, not waiting for a dismissal. Followed without a word, the silence between them dense and electric. They didn't speak until they reached her command quarters, sealed inside away from listening ears. She moved like a storm trapped in a bottle, packing, running calculations, replaying the conversation. Leaned against the wall, arms folded, watching her. You forced his hand. I had to. He's going to come after you. Let him try. Frowned. She whirled toward him, frustration spilling into her voice for the first time. What did you want me to do? Let it slide. Pretend the leak didn't exist. Watch more soldiers die so could protect his precious image of order. He didn't flinch. No, I want you to live. That silenced her. Her shoulders dropped slightly, and for the first time she looked tired. Not physically, not even emotionally, just tired of always having to fight uphill. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to take me seriously, she said softly. And every time I prove myself, there's another wall, another challenge, another man like trying to shove me back in a corner. And I'm done being polite about it. Crossed the room slowly. I know, I see it every day, but you can't fight everyone at once. She looked up at him, her voice quieter now. So what do I do? You let me take some of the hits for once. That caught her off guard. She searched his face, trying to read the meaning behind it. Why? He exhaled through his nose, a tired, humorless sound. Because I believe in you, and because I'm already too damn deep in this to pretend I don't care. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It crackled, live and dangerous. Her eyes were still locked on his. But this time there was no command, no challenge, no fire, just heat. Pure, unspoken, unavoidable. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I didn't ask for your loyalty. I know, but you've got it. She didn't say another word. She didn't have to. She stepped forward and rested her head against his chest, and he didn't pull away. His arms wrapped around her, careful but strong, as if sheltering a flame. And for the first time since he met her, she allowed herself to be held. Just for a moment. But it was enough. Later that night, a coded message arrived on her private console. Was still in the room, still seated at the edge of her cot, cleaning his sidearm when she read it. Her expression tightened as her eyes scanned the lines. Then she slid the screen toward him. Deployment order, commander reassigned. Immediate planetary evaluation mission. Solo. He stared at it, frown deepening. They're isolating you. I know. Orders from. She nodded. It's a trap. She nodded again. He stood, then I'm coming with you. No, you're not authorized. To hell with authorization. Her eyes softened. I need you here if I don't come back. You will. She smiled faintly. Then you'd better be waiting. When she left hours later, the Dreadnought's hangar was nearly empty. Only a skeleton crew was present to see her off. No formal send-off. No backup squad. Just her gear, and a modified scout ship pre-programmed for orbital descent. She paused at the ramp, turned once, and caught eyes from across the platform. He didn't wave. Neither did she. But something passed between them in that glance, a promise not yet spoken. The ramp sealed shut. The ship rose and vanished into the black. And was left standing in the silence, already planning what he would do if she didn't come back. Because now, it wasn't just about duty. It was personal. The descent onto 6 should have been uneventful. The atmosphere was stable, the orbital entry trajectory pre-programmed for precision, and the mission brief, at least on paper, was a routine recon of an old Empire listening post marked for dismantling, but had reviewed too many reports and seen too many coincidences lately to believe this was anything but a setup. She didn't miss the way the hangar staff averted their eyes before liftoff, or how authorization code was the only one attached to her deployment manifest. She didn't even get a co-pilot. They wanted her alone, isolated, easy to remove. Her fingers danced over the nav console as she rerouted power to auxiliary sensors, checking for any anomalies in the flight path, anything out of place. The closer she got to the surface, the more the sensors distorted. Low-level interference. Not natural. A jamming field, masked in the signal bleed of atmospheric static, just low enough to seem like background radiation, but too consistent, too controlled. Her eyes narrowed. She changed course manually, kicking the thrusters into an arc and adjusting descent angle without alerting the ship's automated system. If this was an ambush, they'd be watching for a specific landing path. She wasn't going to give them that. The ship hit the ground hard, but not critically. Dust kicked up in thick orange clouds as she powered down the drive core and activated stealth shielding. No comms, no pings, no signatures. The listening post lay in the distance, a half-buried facility of corroded alloys and long-forgotten antennae protruding from the rock like the ribs of a dead beast. But as she approached, noted the most telling detail of all: the gates were open. A structure supposedly sealed since the early Empire Wars had its doors wide, hinges polished, and security nodes humming with power. She didn't even have to check. Someone had been here recently. Someone was probably still inside. Her boots barely made a sound as she advanced down the corridor, plasma sidearm drawn, motion tracker muted to avoid feedback. The interior smelled of fresh coolant and recent discharge, definitely not a derelict. She counted 6 corridors, 3 security checkpoints, and 1 active camera still pivoting overhead. Then she saw them, 2 men in off-regulation armor, both carrying weapons without faction markings. Mercenaries. Not pirates this time. Hired guns. Hadn't even tried to disguise the kill team. They didn't see her coming. 2 quick shots. Precision. One collapsed with a sizzling chest wound, the other dropped silently as a stun round crackled through his spine. She dragged the unconscious one into a side room and tied him down, overriding the local system to disable the camera feeds temporarily. Then she began the download, accessing the core data bank of the old post, not because she expected anything useful, but because if wanted her dead, this facility must have something worth hiding. As the files decrypted, lines of code unraveled into garbled fragments of communication logs, hidden channels, shadow transmissions, financial records. Empire credits routed through blacklisted nodes, shipments marked as relief diverted to shell factions. It was worse than she thought. Hadn't just protected. He had built an entire secondary operation beneath the Empire's radar, using the Crimson Fist as a mobile fortress to prop up his own shadow empire. And she had just walked into his disposal chute. The lights in the corridor cut out. The hum of machinery dropped. Her heart didn't skip. She was already moving, grabbing the data spike, reloading her sidearm, and sprinting for the emergency stairwell. The ambush came fast, 4 armed mercs descending from the upper hallways, their boots hammering against the metal grating, plasma fire scorching the walls around her. She dove behind a reinforced beam, rolled into a maintenance shaft, and kicked open the vent with brute force. Sparks lit the air. She crawled through the darkness, cursing under her breath, still clutching the spike. Every second was a gamble. If they got their hands on her, the spike, or both, it would all be over. Meanwhile, back on the Crimson Fist was losing patience. The ship was too quiet again, not with tension this time, but with silence that came from deliberate neglect. It had been 32 hours since departed. No pings, no check-ins, and not one officer had mentioned her name. She was being erased in real time, files removed from command lists. Mission logs quietly sealed, had caught it happening. He confronted one of the bridge officers about it, was told that Commander's operation has been reassigned to Outer Fleet jurisdiction. Code for, forget she existed. He didn't. He knew how to read a trap when he saw one. He wasn't protocol-bound anymore. Had always been sharp, always one step ahead, but even she couldn't survive an entire hit squad without backup. She'd gone alone because she'd had no choice, because she trusted him to move when it mattered. He moved. That night he broke into the hangar bay's restricted wing and accessed the deep-log nav coordinates from the ship's shadow archive. He cross-referenced them with patrol routes, elimination zones, and old Empire dumping grounds. 6. Abandoned post, flagged as reclamation pending. No return trip authorized. He took a gunship. He didn't ask for clearance. He didn't care if it was treason. He strapped in, powered the core, and set a course through the most chaotic ion tunnel in the local system. Let the ship's AI flag the jump as a malfunction. Let the command logs show him as MIA. All that mattered was reaching her in time. When he dropped out of orbit, the planet greeted him with a sandstorm and signal interference thick enough to fry a comm array. He forced the gunship through it anyway, scanning for any energy readings, anything faint. There, a small ripple, masked, almost gone, but present. He followed it, skimming the dunes until a shape rose beneath the clouds, the listening post. The gates were open. Smoke was rising from a side hatch, and inside it was war. He landed hot. Didn't wait for protocols. Burst through the outer corridor in full armor, rifle raised, HUD blazing with red targets. He saw 3 mercs immediately. Dropped 2 with chest shots, 1 with a knee blow and elbow to the temple. Moved fast, slicing through shadows, following the trail of scorched metal and cracked vents that could only belong to her. He was yelling her name now, over comms that were mostly static, hoping she could hear him. And then he found her. Pinned behind a collapsed support beam, blood on her temple, breathing ragged but conscious. She looked up as he slid into cover beside her, and for one beat, just 1 second, her eyes softened. "Took you long enough," she muttered. He laughed, breathless. "Missed me." "I was hopping for a drone." Together they fought their way out, side by side, blasting through corridors, evading collapses, stealing weapons from fallen mercs, and rerouting power to jam the post's comms so no reinforcements could be called. They reached the roof access, climbed the old antenna spine, and signaled the gunship manually, setting off a flare just as the last storm began to roll in. Lightning arced above them like skyfire. The ramp opened. They jumped aboard just as the horizon lit with plasma fire from a delayed explosion, triggered by the spike she left behind to overload the post's core. They didn't speak as the ship lifted, still lying side by side on the floor of the cargo bay, catching their breath. But when the hatch sealed and silence finally wrapped around them, turned to her and reached out, brushing the blood gently from her cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She leaned into the touch. "You disobeyed orders," she said softly. "I disobeyed your orders," he corrected. She smirked, reckless. "Yeah, well, you're worth it." She didn't argue. And neither of them spoke again, until they were halfway to the rendezvous point. The gunship soared low across the edge of 6's upper atmosphere, its stabilizers groaning as it climbed through the choked remnants of the storm. Dust clung to its hull, scorched and pitted by shrapnel. Inside, the silence between and was no longer one born of caution, suspicion, or unspoken tensions. It was the kind of quiet that followed survival, the kind where adrenaline had ebbed, exhaustion had set in, and both of them knew too much had changed to pretend otherwise. Sat on a med-panel bench, plasma burns scorched into one sleeve of her armor, a long gash across her thigh hastily sealed with a stim patch, while stood near the console, typing commands into the system to mask their trajectory. They hadn't spoken much since they escaped the listening post, and neither had tried to dissect the look they exchanged on the cargo bay floor. They didn't need to. That moment had said everything. But there was still the matter of the Empire, and Fleet Command, "Not going to protect us," said, not turning around. "Once he realizes you're still alive and I went rogue, he'll spin it as insubordination. Say you compromised classified data. Say I defected." Didn't argue. Her head leaned back against the panel, eyes half closed, her voice low but clear. "He won't stop until one of us is dead, and if we try to expose him now, he'll wipe the evidence before we even dock. So what do we do?" We don't go back to the Crimson Fist. That got his attention. He turned, arms crossed. Then where? She lifted her head slowly. The main orbital shipyards. That's where the encrypted supply routes were triangulated. That's where the funds are being laundered through fake requisition orders. It's not just using our fleet. He's feeding a private army. But if we can broadcast from the control tower under a fleet-wide override beacon, every squadron within 100 sectors will get the signal before he can kill it. You think we can get there without being spotted? I don't think we have a choice. Took a deep breath. Then we'll need new clearance codes and a reason to dock. His lips curled into something close to a smirk. That's why you're with me, Sergeant. It took them 36 hours to reach the edge of space, traveling through off-grid lanes and refueling in a derelict trade hub outside Alliance jurisdiction. They swapped transponder tags 3 times, cycled hull signatures through a fake trader ID, and ran silent across half the route. Handled the encryption routines, her hands flying over the console like she was born with a terminal wired into her bloodstream. Took over every time a mechanical fault flared. He still didn't trust the stabilizer thrusters, and he was right to be cautious. On approach, the portside reactor flared red, a last-second fault nearly blowing out their primary guidance system. Rerouted the flow manually while patched the command relay by hand. They didn't speak, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything worth saying had been buried beneath urgency. When the tower hailed them, it was a familiar voice. Unregistered vessel, identify and state your cargo. Failure to comply will result in auto-defense activation. Looked at, she didn't blink. She activated the voice modulator and responded without hesitation. This is Transport Delta 59. Industrial coolant shipment for Bay 4, emergency supply order per Directive 77A clearance code K3Z11. There was a pause, then the hangar acknowledged. Proceed, docking vector uploaded. They were in. The hangar was a sprawling chasm of magnetic rails, freight drones, and swarm maintenance bots darting across decks like insects tending a hive. Their ship looked like nothing special. A dirty freighter with scorched paint and 2 tired occupants in repair suits, but had already rerouted the ship's identity to match a junker that had exploded in an asteroid belt 3 weeks prior. It wouldn't fool's inner circle forever, but it would buy them an hour, maybe 2. They moved fast, through side corridors, past service bulkheads, through vent tunnels and maintenance shafts. Knew this layout too well. She'd memorized the tower schematics months ago during her early promotions when she'd studied every major tactical hub for vulnerabilities. She hadn't expected to ever use that information like this, but she never left anything to chance. The command tower was buried beneath 3 levels of administrative dead zones, accessible only by clearance tier Omega 5 or higher. Had built her own key. Once we trigger the override, she said as they reached the relay chamber door, the data stream will go live across the network. We'll have less than 90 seconds before the system isolates the signal. Plenty of time, muttered. He placed a hand on her shoulder before they entered. She turned to him, surprised by the contact but didn't pull away. He spoke quietly. After this goes live, they're going to hunt us. Won't back down, he'll send everything. I know. I need you to promise something. She raised an eyebrow. You're giving orders now. He didn't smile. If I don't make it, you keep running. You finish what we started. You don't stop. She stared at him for a long second, her voice softer than he'd ever heard. Not without you. Then she stepped into the tower. They moved fast. She interfaced with the main terminal while he stood guard, plasma rifle charged and ready. The room was dark but humming with power, thousands of encrypted files flowing through the cores like rivers of light. His fingers blurred across the keys as she input the beacon sequence, bypassed internal lockdowns, and seeded the compiled data packet into the override slot. The terminal beeped once. Then again. Upload active. Across the sector, every fleet channel flared to life. The signal surged into warships, scout vessels, planetary outposts. Dozens of encrypted frequencies suddenly flooded with raw truth. Every requisition, every altered kill order, every supply run that had vanished into black space, every mercenary payment, names, faces, codes. This entire operation, naked to the stars. But then came the alarm. Security breach detected. Didn't pause. She locked the console, stripped the drive, and shoved it into her belt. Grabbed her arm, yanked her into the corridor as sirens wailed. Steel doors slammed down across the deck. "Secondary exit," she shouted. They dove into a side tunnel as troopers poured into the command wing, Empire soldiers, fully armored, fully armed under its banner. Gunned down the first two without breaking stride. Hurled a flash grenade into the hallway, blinding the second wave, and they sprinted toward the vertical lift shaft. She overrode the door while covered the corridor. Plasma bolts screamed past his helmet. One clipped his shoulder, spun him around, but he didn't drop. The shaft opened. They jumped, slid, fell, landed hard, rolled into a crouch, breathing ragged, winced as he slammed into the deck, blood seeping through his uniform. She pulled him up. "Not dying here," she hissed. They reached the hangar access just as the bay lights turned red. Their ship was already surrounded. Drones hovered, soldiers marched in. Then's voice echoed across the speaker system, oily and smug. "You had promise, Commander. You really did." Stared at the overhead array, her voice flat. "Still do. Let's not pretend you're going to make it out of here." She didn't look at, just reach for his hand, interlocking her fingers with his. He didn't resist. Her other hand tapped her belt. Remote ignition. Far above them, an auxiliary fuel line in the docking spine ignited. The resulting shockwave blew two of the patrol drones into the hangar wall. Smoke erupted. Confusion followed. Opened fire. Sprinted into the chaos, dragging him with her. They didn't reach the ship. But they reached a supply crawler parked under the landing struts. The control panel as laid down suppressive fire. The crawler burst forward through the smoke and bodies, crashing through the half-open gate into the maintenance corridor beyond. They vanished into the station's lower levels, alarms shrieking behind them. They didn't stop until the crawler ground to a halt in a storage hangar far from the main deck, sealed off and forgotten. Collapsed to the floor, clutching his side. Knelt beside him, hand on his chest. "You're going to be fine," she said. "Sure, just a scratch. You're bleeding out. Then kiss me before I go." She blinked, then leaned in. Her lips touched his. Not soft, not tender, but real. Alive. When she pulled away, her voice shook. "You're not going anywhere." He grinned weak. "Yes, ma'am." They lay there, bruised and broken but breathing, the hard drive still clutched in her hand, their names echoing across every fleet channel in the galaxy. And now the Empire had to decide what to do with the truth. The hangar was silent now. Somewhere deep in the guts of station, far from the firefights, sirens, and chaos above, sat on the floor beside's resting form. The makeshift bandage around his side was soaked in dark red, but the bleeding had slowed, and his pulse was steady. He was unconscious but alive. A row of emergency ration packs and stim injectors lay scattered near the wall, her satchel torn open from the escape, the hard drive still blinking faintly in her hand. It had taken her hours to sterilize the wound, recalibrate the crawler's interior as a semi-pressurized med space, and override the security node of the old hangar door to jam outgoing signals. They were buried, isolated, but safe. And above them, the Empire was burning from the inside out. It had started the moment the broadcast hit the open net. Ships that had remained neutral began to reposition. Officers who had questioned the delays in their supplies now had names to attach to the disappearances. Sectors began to lock down, demanding audits, reviews, and accountability. The pressurized chain of power that had built so carefully, so slowly and secretly, had cracked. His lies couldn't be patched fast enough. He tried, of course. He flooded the channels with denials, rerouted blame, even claimed had been brainwashed by rebel extremists. But the evidence had its own momentum. Once the files hit the open tribunal record banks, public inquiries followed, and even's closest allies began to detach, quietly resigning or flipping allegiance to protect their own ranks. Within 48 hours, the Empire's Internal Investigation Corps had dispatched war auditors to the Crimson Fist and was placed under emergency review. Not arrested, not yet, but isolated, his calm suspended, his authority revoked. Watch the reports come in through her cracked, one after another. She didn't smile, she didn't celebrate. This wasn't a victory parade. It was fallout. But it was enough. Enough to prove she hadn't imagined the corruption. Enough to make sure no one else had to die just to keep a traitor's ambition protected. She leaned back against the bulkhead and looked its face, pale but peaceful in unconsciousness, and let herself breathe for the first time in days. He woke 12 hours later, groggy but coherent. The first thing he asked for was water. The second was her. "I'm right here," she said, sliding next to him. He blinked slow, then smirked. "Did we win?" "We didn't die, that's close enough." He reached for her hand, and she didn't hesitate. She let his calloused fingers wrap around hers and stayed like that, still and quiet, letting the weight of everything settle between them, not as a burden, but as something finished. Not all battles end with explosions. Some just stop when someone refuses to run anymore. 3 days later, a drop team arrived. Not from the Crimson Fist, but from Fleet Tribunal. The insignia on their armor wasn't local command, it was enforcement. Internal affairs. They moved through the station with clinical precision, weapons holstered, visors up. Their leader, a silver-haired commander with tribunal colors on her collar, approached without introduction, looked her in the eye, then nodded. "You broadcasted data from an unauthorized relay point, using a hijacked override code and stolen encryption keys," she said plainly. Nodded. "Correct. You bypassed at least 4 fleet-level protocols, destroyed military property, and publicly implicated a superior officer without clearance." "Also correct. And your evidence exposed one of the largest misappropriation scandals in recent Empire history, which will likely lead to half a dozen demotions and at least 3 court-martials." "Sounds about right." The commander paused, then extended "The tribunal thanks you for your service. Effective immediately, you are reassigned to Fleet Command Intelligence with field discretion. Rank: Commander First Class. Authority: unrestricted. You'll be required to report quarterly and remain off the Crimson Fist for the remainder of Admiral's trial. Further accommodations are your discretion." Blinked once, then took the chip. "Understood." The commander glanced down at, who was now sitting upright with the help of a med-frame brace. "And him?" "He stays with me." There was a pause, then a simple nod. "We'll be in touch." The tribunal left without ceremony. No threats, no interrogation, just acknowledgement. That was enough. Help to his feet, and for the first time there was no weight on her shoulders pressing her spine straight. She could stand tall because she chose to, not because she needed to prove something. He leaned against her slightly, and she didn't pull away. He was heavier than he looked, but she was stronger than she appeared. They left on a quiet shuttle, one of the tribunal's unmarked carriers, headed for a civilian refit station on the edge of neutral space. No one chased them. No one stopped them. For the first time in years, wasn't under someone else's chain of command. She was the chain. The ship they were given was small, sleek, and quiet, perfect for off-grid travel, cloaked navigation, and discretion. Spent the first week customizing it. Spent most of it recovering, working with his shirt off and arguing with the ship's AI about engine tolerances. She liked the noise. He liked the silence that came after. At night, they shared meals in the lower galley, close quarters and dim lights making the whole ship feel like something more than a battlefield extension. One evening, with the stars crawling past the viewport in slow motion, leaned against the frame and looked at her. Not just her face, but all of her. The small, fierce body that had marched through fire and war and betrayal without once bowing. "You never stopped fighting," he said. "I never could. You can now." She looked at him for a long moment, eyes unreadable. Then she reached for his hand again. "I don't want to stop. I just want to choose what's worth fighting for." He leaned closer. "And what's that now?" "You." That was the first time she kissed him where no one could see. No war, no command deck, just them. It wasn't desperate, it wasn't fast. It was real. They spent the following weeks hopping between systems, not hiding, not running, just moving. Some nights they talked about the old missions. Some nights they said nothing. But every morning they woke in the same bed, and every time he looked at her, she looked back like she wasn't alone anymore. One day, while calibrating their new route, paused and turned to her. "Still furious, Commander?" She smirked, "Always." "Still my boss?" She nodded slowly, "Always." He grinned, "Good, then order me to stay right here." She did. And he obeyed.